Welcome to Power Lunch Live. I'm Rhett Power, your host. It's good to be back with you. I've been on a break for the last 2.5 weeks. It's been fantastic, I have to admit. Hate to admit that, but it's been a great break. After about 200 shows in the last year and a half, took a little time off. But we're back, and it's great to be with you here on Power Lunch Live. The point of the show is to bring today's thought leaders, best-selling authors, people who are doing amazing work in the world that we can learn from as business leaders and business owners and entrepreneurs so that we can get better at what we do. That's the whole point of the show. Now, we do broadcast not only on, not only on LinkedIn Live, but Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, and a bunch of other platforms. I think one my kids like, and I can't think of it right now. But anyway, I'm having a little trouble speaking, as you can tell. I'm back into the swing of things here. Twitch, that's the one, Twitch, right. So we do monitor those platforms during the program. And if you have questions, please do ask. Please get on the keyboard, write your questions, interact with us, because that's part of why we do the show. Now, today we're going to be talking about Agile and how small and medium enterprises use Agile, and are they using it the right way? Now, I've got Darrell Rigby and Steve Berez from Bain. They've got this great new book that you must get. I didn't bring a copy with me. I am on the road, by the way. This is the first show in 8 months that we've done on the road. I'm doing it from my hotel room in Charleston, South Carolina. And it's good to be back on doing these remote shows after 6 months in the home studio. So, but anyway, their new book is called Doing Agile Right. Came out in the spring, and they wrote a recent HBR, Harvard Business Review article, Develop Agility That Outlasts the Pandemic, on how small and medium businesses can use Agile to respond and recover from the current crisis. Darrell Rigby and Steve Berez, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's nice to be here. You sound so guilty for taking a 2.5 week break. It sounds to me like you needed it.
I did, and you're absolutely right. Why do we feel guilty about taking some time off? That is just, I don't know. That's something wrong with that, isn't it?
There is something wrong. I agree.
So, guys, the book is fascinating. Agile. I want to talk about that in a minute. I want to get into the book in a minute. But how has COVID? I got to ask you, how has COVID changed Bain and the way you guys work, and what are you seeing in your clients? How are your clients responding to COVID? And I could add in the social issues there too, because that's and the economic issues.
Well, I'm happy to start, and Steve, feel free to weigh in. Bain's a worldwide firm, and so this started rolling across our company earlier in January and February in parts of Asia, and then spreading to Europe, and then spreading to the US. So it certainly has affected Bain, and we've been working remotely for 5 months anyway. And it's not all bad.
Yeah.
Working remotely. When my computer crashed this morning, I knew I was in trouble because there wasn't a help desk to take the laptop down to, where they just fix it up lickety split. But on the other hand, we do a lot of travel. I don't know. I've got 10 million miles under my belt on airlines, and sleeping in my own bed is not all bad. But it is certainly affecting all of us. I think the ability to have the close kinds of relationships that we like to have with clients,
right,
protecting the safety of our employees as well is a major effort. And mostly what I like about dealing with this terrible pandemic is it does put life into perspective. Business is important, certainly, but the health and the psychological welfare of people whether they're our clients, whether they're our people, whether they're our friends and our communities. We're fortunate to be part of a company that respects that and encourages us to reach out and help others. And there's nothing like a crisis to test the true culture of a company. And I am so deeply respectful of Bain's principles and practices that it's reaffirming.
Yeah.
What I would say in addition to that, thinking about just being a consultant at a time like this, our core work, the mechanics of what we do, has really not been impacted significantly. We're still able to gather the information we need to make strategic decisions. We're able to conduct workshops with clients with the right interactive tools and collaboration tools and so forth. But what's really different, as Darrell was saying, is the relationship side of this. And especially with clients that we began working with since we went remote, it requires being really determined to build relationships, to consciously take the time aside from the standard Zoom meetings and really get to know people. But COVID and people working at home and so forth, it actually does create even more opportunities. You get to see, maybe somebody's pet or child or someone in the background and start having a conversation about that. And even with our team members, so we've onboarded many new people since COVID started, hundreds, maybe getting onto thousands of new people. And it's the same thing. We have to all work consciously to build those relationships, even though we're remote. But it is doable if you put your mind to it.
Do you think it's going to change? I mean, a lot of your staff works remotely anyway because they're working with clients and they're traveling, like you talked about. But you think that you're going to rethink the way you guys do business? Is it going to make, if somebody wants to stay at home 3 days a week, is it going to make that possible?
I think it might. It's a little hard to predict at this point, but my best prediction is that we'll find a way to combine the best of both physical and digital work, because we've developed a lot of new tools that are very effective for tracking work and keeping in touch with people. And I think there will be some meetings that we just decide to do remotely. So originally, Steve and I right now, we're supposed to be on worldwide tours talking about the book with clients and presenting at conferences. And we're not doing any of that, which we miss. It's great to be live with people. On the other hand, we can talk with China late at night and Australia, and then in the morning be on the Zoom cast with Brazil. And so it's amazing to be able to cover so many parts of the world at all hours of the day. So yeah, I think we'll find a way to combine the best of them, and some of those digital tools will remain.
There is some efficiency in it, isn't there? There really is. I mean, you've got 10 million miles, I mean, you waste days at a time in that sort of transit between going to give a keynote or a seminar or see a client, and then you lose another day going back to where so there is some efficiency to it. Absolutely. So I wanted to get into the book a little bit. And you guys talk about how small and medium enterprises aren't using Agile the right way. What do you mean?
Well, the problem is we called the book Doing Agile Right because we see so many people doing Agile wrong, unfortunately. And those people sadly give the word a bad name, which we think is unfortunate. We don't want it to get turned into another management fad that just ends up on the scrap heap like business process reengineering or quality circles or something like that. And so we're seeing a lot of people, unfortunately, that are using Agile as a euphemism for layoffs. If we got to get rid of 30% of the people, well, we'll just call it Agile. And it sounds much better than a layoff, doesn't it? It's an Agile transformation. And we're seeing other people that use Agile to mean doing what I say, but faster than before. Well, that's not Agile either. So we really are serious about making sure that people understand what Agile is, what it's good for, what it's not good for, because it's not a panacea. And we're making trade-offs when we adopt Agile principles and practices. Small businesses need to learn how to use Agile and scale it as they become larger companies. Medium and bigger businesses sometimes have lost some of their agility and need to figure out how to reinvent their innovation processes. And that's what we want to see done right.
What are those trade? I mean, you brought up those trade-offs, and I'll come back. Let's come back to you, Steve, and to answer that main question. But you mentioned some of those trade-offs. What are the trade-offs that small and medium enterprises make versus, say, a big organization? What's the difference?
Well, for example, in order to succeed, we believe that companies need to do three things. They need to run their businesses efficiently. Mm-hmm. They need to change their businesses effectively, and they need to harmonize those operations to get development and delivery harmonized, working together. So when small businesses are first getting started up, typically they're very good at doing innovation. They're not often as good at developing those efficiencies, running reliably, efficiently. How do we develop those management systems, the planning, the budgeting, the reviewing processes, so that we remain agile, but we also know how to create scale so that we can compete effectively? And so those trade-offs are very real. I'll give you one of the simplest examples is in Agile, we don't like a lot of layers of hierarchical approval in order to get things done. And it always sounds great to get rid of layers. And yet, a lot of people like to have promotions every 6 months. Well, without layers, without titles, you can't have a promotion every 6 months either. So there's a trade-off there. You have to say, yes, we're not going to have as many layers. We're going to be a flatter organization, and we're going to have to operate as a team of equals in ways that maybe we haven't been accustomed to in the past. It's a little different.
It is a little bit different, yeah. Go ahead, Steve. All right.
Oh, no problem. So I spend a lot of my time working with teams doing technology innovation, most often software development. And when companies are very small, they often have natural agility, I'll call it. It's kind of obvious to them they need to create small increments of new capabilities and test it quickly with customers and then pivot when when it's not working, or double down on things that customers do like. But as firms become larger, more mid-sized companies, some of those natural agility elements really become more difficult, more problematic. You might have an entrepreneur who was they understood everything about the product when there were 2 or 3 teams, but now there's 30 teams, and they still might be behaving in the same way of prioritizing and telling teams what to work on and what they like and don't like. But they're not realizing that they're no longer as close to the customers they were. The business is too big. They've got to rely more on the frontline teams. And that's a transition that is a conscious transition you have to make. And those who don't find that their businesses are suddenly slowing down, they're getting less connected to customers. And it's very important that they not do that, so that they preserve the things that made them work when they were small companies. Lots of things we deal with in the book talk about how even the largest companies can work and innovate like the most successful small companies do, but it does take some real thought to put all the different elements in place. And as Darrell also said, the importance of balancing the running of the business and the changing of the business, and the layers you put in to run the business more effectively as you scale are exactly the things that get in the way of changing the business if you're not conscious about doing those in different ways.
So you guys wrote this Harvard Business Review article about how small businesses can use Agile to recover from COVID. Talk about that a little bit, because I think that's fascinating to me, because I think and it makes a lot of sense to me. So kind of walk me through, how do you think that small businesses can use it to get through COVID and through the economic crisis that we're facing?
So I'd say a couple of things. One is necessity being the mother of invention. All of us have been forced to realize a couple of things. One is, we love to believe that we can predict the future. And if we're smart enough, if we spend enough time at it, we can certainly figure out what the future is going to look like. And that's just not true anymore. Not that it was probably ever as true as we tended to think it was, but in a world with pandemic diseases and natural disasters and social unrest and military conflicts and trade wars, I think we're realizing we simply, no matter how much time we spend analyzing things, we cannot predict the unpredictable. We have to figure out how to adapt to that faster. And I think COVID in that respect has opened our eyes to a lot of things that should have been obvious before. And I hear a lot of executives, small, medium, and large companies saying, now that we read your book, we realize that a lot of the things we had to do during COVID, those are actually agile, aren't they? So we used to make 5 major decisions in a month. Now we make 5 major decisions in a day. And we used to require 6 layers of approval. We just can't do that anymore. We have to give people greater autonomy. And so just naturally, we're being forced to do that. The other thing that we've learned in this process is a lot of people think, well, if we're not agile today, but we want to be agile, we have to do 2 things. One is we need a major reorganization of the entire company. We got to put everybody into squads and tribes and chapters and guilds and shake up the entire organization. And we probably need a whole bunch of new people as well, because our people, heaven knows, they're not creative enough. Well, lo and behold, we're seeing a lot of companies be very adaptive, very agile, with the same organization structure they had before, with the same talent that they had before. They just never knew they had so many corporate MacGyvers buried inside the organization that if they just unleash them, they're actually capable of doing more than we ever imagined. So I think that part's very good. What they need to learn, however, is in the process, we're exhausting people. We're fatiguing people. We haven't really learned how to make this sustainable. We were able to crunch people for 3 or 4 months, but we can't keep up this pace forever. So how do we bottle up the good parts of this and yet make it more systematic, more stable, so that we can do it over the long haul? And fortunately, that's what our book was intended to lay out. So it is possible to do that, and people are learning it.
Yeah, it seems like, and I'll ask you, Steve, about this in a second. I think what struck me about that article is that, and you just kind of said it, it's never too late to start, right? And that was sort of my next question, is how do you, but you kind of answered it. I mean, you don't have to overthink it, in other words, and go out and completely shake up and tear down your organization. And I think that was a great point. Steve, did you want to weigh in there, or?
Yeah, I was just more on that theme of you don't need to have a intricate plan to get started.
Black belts and Scrum Masters and all the
right, and important. One of the most valuable elements of the Agile methodology are feedback loops. And those feedback loops, you usually think of them as things that you're doing to get customer input on your product or service or so forth that you're improving. But you can use those same mechanisms for improving how you're doing the work. Actually asking the teams, typical Scrum sprint review, retrospectives that happen at the end of every sprint, where you ask the team, what's working, what's not, what one thing can we do better in the next 2 weeks to improve. And if you do that, if you follow that methodology, if you empower people and listen to them and let people make improvements and share the learnings in your company and with other companies, you could really be on a path to a much better organization at the same time as you're making better products and services for your customers.
Yeah, Rhett, I love what Steve just said. I believe it wholeheartedly. I think a lot of people feel like in order to get started, you got to have the perfect plan, no mistakes. And what we believe strongly is that Agile is effective by just getting started, focusing on customers, testing and learning. And we feel the same way about building an Agile business system, that you use Agile principles and practices to build the Agile business system. You don't need to use a bureaucratic, perfect planning process to do it. In fact, it's a little ironic to think about creating an Agile business system using bureaucratic approaches to do it. Well, yeah, we're going to be very top down. We're going to be very command and control. But then once it's in place, don't worry, then we'll be Agile. Fat chance. Use Agile to become Agile.
And it's starting to build that culture, right? It's those things that you do in the meetings. It's the way that you ask the questions. It's the empowering of people to do, to make decisions and to innovate. And that's a process, but so much of it's about culture to me, and just about how you, as a manager or an entrepreneur or a leader, let your teams do what they do, and give them permission to fail, give them permission to go out and be creative. And I think that you're absolutely right. Both of you are absolutely right on that. As an executive coach, I see it all the time, the need to change leadership behaviors. And I think that's particularly challenging for businesses whose founders are still in place and accustomed to making decisions. Can you guys talk about that a little bit? You address that in the book.
Yes, it's a great point, because in order to make Agile work, you really need mindsets and methods, or principles and practices. You need those two things together. And, the problem with bureaucracy is it kind of sort of works in a lot of companies. You can criticize Frederick Taylor all we want to. He improved productivity. Now, he ruined a lot in the process, including getting himself fired. But we all develop work habits by making assumptions, facing trigger events that set off behaviors, and those lead to results, and those lead to rewards, and those reinforce our assumptions. And many of us who have been in leadership positions for 10 or 15 or 20 years, those are firmly entrenched assumptions and habits and behaviors. Mm-hmm. And if you're going to change those, you have to change something in that loop. You have to change your assumptions from people are inherently lazy and they don't want to work hard to people want to do well. Something's getting in their way. What is it? And instead of believing that people are lazy and therefore I have to control them, I have to command them to do everything. Well, let me run an experiment. Let me see what happens if I do empower them, if I do give them greater control. And even if they make a mistake, what if I reward their learning and their growth instead of demanding that they stick to their budget? So many companies these days, and I despise it, So many companies these days reward people for hitting their budgets as opposed to improving their results, as opposed to improving their position in the marketplace. And so what Steve and I are doing every day is working with senior leaders to say, let's get your assumptions out on the table. Let's get your behaviors out where we can examine them, and your reward systems out where we can examine them. Yeah. And let's create pilots where we can actually test those and see whether there's not a better way to doing things. I know what you've got now works, but we think you can do things in ways that'll improve productivity by 40%. Wow. That's worth trying. Let's see if we can figure it out and make everybody happier in the process.
Darrell, our third co-author, Sarah Elk, and I wrote an article that appeared in Harvard Business Review in the May-June issue called The Agile C-Suite. And it talks about how leadership teams can work together as members of an agile team and think about not just their own functional role, but how do they work together to improve their companies and to reinforce each other's skills. And the marketing people bringing to the team a better understanding of customers, and the CIO bringing to the team better data and analytics and so forth. That article, while it applies to the C-suite of a Fortune 500 company, could apply to a 5 or 6 person startup also, and playing different roles. And really, the moral of that is that as people work together more as teams, the whole company is going to be more effective, and they're going to set the example, whether it's for a large company or a small company, of how people can work collaboratively for the benefit of the whole, and how they can bring their own individual skills together in a way that's way more powerful than anyone individually could be on their own.
Yeah, that's a great point, Steve. Thank you. You guys talk about premature scaling, and that's one of the most common reasons for failure. And I remember when I got that quote from you guys, I'm like, God, I'm so guilty of doing that in my own company. I'm like, God, I remember when I said it the first time. Go big or go home, right? And so anyway, talk about that for a little bit, because I think you're right, and I think that's a trap that we all fall into, particularly as new entrepreneurs, or as we were scaling and kind of blowing up. And so talk about that, because I think that's really important.
Yeah, it was a fascinating era of this go big or go home, which really meant get acquired before you go bankrupt. I'm going to get as big as I can to get as high valuation as possible, and let's hope I get acquired before I run out of cash. And it's just so tempting, it's so beguiling to say, and we're all accustomed to this of, look, I need a huge investment up front, and revenues, well, there's not likely to be nearly enough revenues for 2 or 3 years. But trust me, if we build it, they will come. All we have to do is just lay out all of this, just back up the Brinks trucks, unload the cash, let us start developing what we plan to develop, and then the revenues will eventually be there.
I think I said that too, by the
way. Well, sadly, it just fails far too often. And Agile believes, wait a second, prove to me that there's customer demand in here sooner rather than later. Let's find the greatest risks, and let's find ways to experiment, to test that sooner rather than later, because we can likely improve the efficiency over time. But if the customers aren't interested in what we're developing, then we have the potential to burn a whole lot of cash. Most innovations that go wrong for one of 2 reasons. Not not because they failed to develop the specifications that they originally expected to develop. That usually goes just fine. It goes wrong for one of two reasons, either because we built the wrong thing. Turns out customers didn't really want what we thought they were going to want, or we built something that operations can't deliver, that it's just not able to deliver what we planned efficiently enough in order to scale and gain market share. And so, in accounting, you'll excuse me, I was I had an accounting minor undergrad, and in accounting, we have this matching process of let's try to match costs with revenues so that we can state our financials. Well, I believe in operations matching as well. Let's see what we can do to bring operations in line with demand and test it, prove that it's available, and then we can scale it. But just let's not assume that after we lay out all of this cash, that revenues, customer demand will ultimately come around, because it may not.
Right. Steve, do you want to weigh in?
Yeah, I mentioned before I do a lot of work with software teams, and we see a really big pattern of bad agile is companies that try to move their entire software engineering team to agile all at once, or to some new methodology all at once, and it inevitably underdelivers. These methods, they kind of work generically, but every company is different, every software architecture is different, every set of customer needs are different, every strategy is different, and you have to actually create a system that works within your company. And there's just no way to predict that up front. You can't just take Amazon or Spotify's method and say this is going to work for me because it works for them. So the companies that attempt to do that really typically get pretty bad results. If however they take some of those learnings, they start with a few teams, and then they do that iteration process where they see what's working and double down on that, and what's not working, and they change it. Then over time they can build a model that works within their company very effectively and scale that, and that's how we see the best success.
Yeah, that makes sense. And what in terms of and something I think is also very important that you wrote about and you talk about is paying attention and believing in agile structures and processes, but not paying enough attention to the values and culture. What do you mean? And talk about that a little bit, because I think that's a really important point. It's I kind of equate it to not really paying attention to the small stuff, right? Which is critical to any business. If you don't do if you're not doing the batting practice and to use a bad sporting analogy, if you're not practicing well, you're not going to play well. And so that, to me, that means you're not paying attention to the small stuff in the business. Is that what you meant by that?
It is. I think a lot of consultants, unfortunately, I am a consultant, but I think a lot of consultants have a tendency to make Agile sound more complicated than it should be. That there's a tendency to make the method sound so difficult, so challenging, because you got to know how to do backlogs, and you got to know how to prioritize, and you got to know how to do sprints exactly right, and you got to do your retrospectives, and there's all of this jargon that sounds so complicated that honestly, I think it's inhibiting Agile, because it's not that hard. Anybody can do it. And all of this confusion, we've seen this with customers of all sorts. When it sounds so difficult, when it sounds so complicated, the natural tendency is to do nothing. We freeze. We don't know how to make a decision, and so we freeze. But actually, Agile is just very simple. It is a better way of doing innovation. And it starts with some different cultures. It starts with some different mindsets. Among them, that customers may not know what they want until you show it to them. That you can do all the research that you want. You know, for example, I've worked in the retail industry, the restaurant industry for a long time. If you interview customers of fast food restaurants and say, what would cause you to come eat at our restaurant morning, noon, and night? They'll say, well, if you just serve me healthy food, I'd be there. Well, I know they say that with the best of intentions, but they're lying. What they want is great tasting food at a low price that can be made and kept fresh for a period of time, and they can probably eat it in their car. And so if you just take what they say at face value and say, all right, then we're going to revamp our menu and everything will taste like cardboard, but it is going to be healthy, you're going to go out of business very quickly. And so in Agile, we really do start with the customer and say they're going to have a hard time articulating what they want, but we're going to prototype. We're going to work with them. We're going to keep changing that all the way along. And if you believe that people are not lazy and that they're not unmotivated, that they want to do good work, that mindset, that culture opens up a lot of new opportunities for what you will let people do. And so I really believe of principles and practices. Without principles, no matter how hard you try to make those practices work, it'll just end up being another bureaucratic club. I mean, weapon,
Yeah.
baseball bat, to go back to your analogy, to get people to do what they're supposed to do. And that defeats the whole purpose of Agile.
Yeah. Steve, did you want to weigh in?
Yeah, I would just add that it's, we often see a kind of a cargo cult mentality with Agile. You know, if I just arrange the boxes on the org chart and the structure of the teams and the ceremonies in the right way, suddenly my company will be Agile and our customers will be delighted. And without as Darrell was talking about, without those principles and mindsets of trust, of customer focus, of an overused term, psychological safety, where people know that they're actually valued, and when they take risks for the right reason, whether it pans out or not, if they learn something, they're going to be that's going to be viewed as a positive, not a potential way to lose your job. So without those real changes in philosophy, all the rest of the mechanics are not worth a lot.
Rhett, you've been at this for a while also. I'll bet, like us, I'll bet you can walk into a company, every company I've ever met with in 43 years of consulting says, oh, we are a customer centric. We're customer. You know as well as I do, you can walk into a company and within an hour you can smell whether they mean that or whether they're lying about it. And so, doesn't take long, does it?
You walk into a place and you know it's well managed or not well managed. I mean, we've seen enough of this to know, and whether it's humming on, like if it's humming along on all cylinders, or if it's got a lot of issues. Absolutely, doesn't take long to see it, because it's just obvious. Tell me what you guys think. Is Agile something that everybody in every organization can use in some way? Does it work in every organization? If it's done right?
I do believe it can. Now, I will say some industries, some companies, some strategies, some departments, some activities are more likely to benefit from Agile teams than others. So if I am in high technology developing very sophisticated robotics, I'm likely to need hundreds, thousands of Agile teams. In some other industries, I may not need as many Agile teams, For example, I don't need an agile team and accounts payable running 2-week sprints and daily stand-ups to figure out how to pay the bill that's due. But I do believe that every company, let me put it this way, if every company needs innovation in order to succeed, and agile teams can make innovation 60 to 100%, those are real numbers, 60 to 100% more successful than traditional ways of doing innovation, then yes, you should be using agile ways to be able to do your innovation. And I also believe that these agile principles that we've been talking about, customer obsession, trust in people, the value of diversity in teams, testing, learning, prioritizing, avoiding multitasking as much as possible. I believe those principles can help anybody to be happier and more effective. I just think there's a reason that Amazon is running 3,000 or more teams at any point in time, and other companies can do fine with 25 agile teams or maybe even less, but that doesn't make them less agile. It just means they don't need as many teams to do it. And by the way, just adding hundreds or thousands of agile teams won't make a company more agile. It's really that combination of how do I get my teams to work with operations in new ways. I can be a very agile enterprise with 25 agile teams.
Yeah. Steve?
Nothing to add.
Two final questions. This one, first is, how do you, from your experience, what's the best way to pick the people you want to get trained on this and to lead this kind of agile mindset in a company? What are you guys seeing as a successful person who leads these efforts? Because that's always something I get that question a lot. Who should I pick to help lead this effort within my company? What's that person look like? Not physically, but what is that person's mindset and mentality? And do you guys have any help for entrepreneurs there?
Yeah, a couple of things, I guess. One is I'd say more people are able to do it than you might imagine. And the fact that we haven't given people opportunities doesn't mean that they're not capable of doing it. We're finding a lot of people are able to do it. But in general, I would say 2 or 3 things tend to make people very good agile team members. One is expertise. You have to bring something to the team. I played a lot of sports when I was in high school. And one of the things that I learned about team sports is that you don't want perfectly well-rounded individuals. You want people who bring extraordinary strengths to a team. And it's okay if they have weaknesses, because we'll have other people on the team that can take care of those weaknesses. So we have a tendency when we're doing reviews or evaluations of people to always get people to focus on what they're not good at doing. That's just silly. When I was playing basketball, I was a small forward. My coach didn't want me dribbling the ball. I wasn't going to dribble the ball. I was going to figure out how to box out, how to take the ball to the hoop. So stop focusing on weaknesses and start reinforcing strengths and bring together teams of people that have strengths. Second of all, you do need people that enjoy working together. And if they don't, they can make contributions to the organization in other places. But on teams, that ability to work together as teams and trust people, respect people for their strengths, I think that's also important. And third, you have to be willing, you have to love, you have to be curious, you have to love learning, you have to love experimenting and saying, that didn't work, but I'll bet this will. That's okay. There's a saying that I despise, which is agile is about failing fast. That's nonsense. Any moron can fail fast, and most morons do. The trick is not to fail fast. The trick is to learn fast. And so we want people who are curious, who are constantly learning, constantly finding better ways to prototype and experiment and say, because when you look at a really good agile team, they are so good at creating prototypes and testing them with customers in ways that tease out things that you wouldn't have known. So I'd point to those three things probably. But Steve, you may have others.
Again, nothing to add. I think those are the keys.
I think I would add that you have to have somebody. You want people that want the responsibility and want the challenge. I think that's another criteria I always add, is that it's got to be somebody that really thrives on that wanting to take it on their shoulders and be responsible. And I think I think that's another thing. Guys, thank you so much. Final question. Looking at everything that's going on globally, and what are you scared about? What worries you about, say, the economy or business or what's happening in the world? And what are you really excited about? What are you seeing in the crystal ball that you're really excited about?
Steve, you want to go?
Sure. We've talked a lot about the importance of diverse agile teams and people doing their best work when they respect each other's differences and can build on them and strengthen them. And what worries me is there's a dynamic going on in this country and in parts of the world where people are exploiting differences for negative reasons, and the old tropes of if you're not like me, you must be bad, right. Whether that's in politics or anything else. And it worries me to see that dynamic. And what I see is hopeful is that I see some movement in the other direction. Some people realizing this isn't the best of us. This isn't the way we're all going to get ahead as individuals and as a society. And we really have to recognize that the differences are what gives us strength and allows us to succeed. And we should be embracing those as opposed to exploiting them. So I think that applies in business, it applies in society and in life. Sometimes we need a harsh reminder of that, don't we? Yes, at times.
Yeah. And I love what Steve said. For me, I probably have two fears. One is I'm in that age bracket where I have to worry about physical health. And so the problems with pandemic diseases, yeah, they frighten me. I would rather avoid that. Thank you very much. And the second is what Steve already said, which is this assumption that if you have a different opinion than I do, you're my enemy, that you are evil. Yeah. And Agile has just the opposite perspective on that, which is if you have a different opinion than I do, then there must be something I can learn from you. And that's good. We love to have differences of opinion. We love to have people's eyes opened to, as opposed to, if you say that, you must be dumb, to how fascinating. Tell me how you see that. And I am very hopeful that we will learn to appreciate those differences, and that feedback is a blessing. Feedback is a gift. Diverse opinions are a gift that help make us smarter and stronger. And I'm hopeful that we will learn that lesson during this difficult time.
Amen to that. That's a good exclamation point on the program today. Steve, Darrell, thank you so much. Where can people find the book?
Amazon's probably the easiest place. Doing Agile Right.
All right, that's a good recommendation. I highly recommend getting the book. I know I've got some brand new clients with a big contract I just got for our coaching business, and it struck me. I actually wrote a couple of notes while you guys were talking. I think the C-suite team needs the book, so I'm going to be making an order today for that, because a couple of things you guys said really struck a chord. Thank you so much for joining us here on Power Lunch Live. It's good to be back with you after a couple of weeks off. Now, we've got a great show lined up this week. You can go to the website powerlunch.live to check out the upcoming shows and the upcoming schedule. And until then, you guys have a good day, good productive day, safe day, and we will see you tomorrow.
Thank you, Rhett.
Enjoyed it. Appreciate the opportunity.